In a trade war between the U.S. and China, China wins. China does not depend on the U.S. market very much. It's about 12% of China's exports. China will do just fine. It's just dumb policy. We are in one-person rule in the United States. Our political system is in a state of collapse.
It's official. Donald Trump is speeding up the collapse of the U.S. economy while dragging America's global reputation through the mud. Meanwhile, China's president is busy traveling the world, locking in new trade agreements with the fastest-growing economies and preparing China for the next brutal phase in U.S.-China relations. Tariffs are Trump's weapon of choice, but the way he's wielding them, unpredictably, inconsistently, has sent shockwaves through governments and financial markets worldwide. Investors, business owners, and leaders have no idea what's coming next. Even here, updating you consistently has been a challenge because every other day, the rules seem to change. But one thing has remained absolutely clear. No matter how this plays out, China is set to win this trade war. While Washington plunges deeper into confusion, Beijing marches forward with discipline and foresight. After being caught flat-footed during Trump's first term, China spent years developing strategies, staying 10 steps ahead. Every time the U.S. moves, China responds with a carefully planned counterattack, applying pressure exactly where it hurts most. Meanwhile, it's becoming painfully obvious the Trump administration had no coherent strategy, no real understanding of global trade, and no idea how tariffs actually function. Trump keeps selling the fantasy that tariffs force other nations to pay the U.S., but in reality, it's American businesses that absorb the costs, and they pass those higher prices right to the American consumer. Today, we're going to break down exactly where Trump's trade war stands, the destruction it's causing within the American economy, and why, no matter what happens, China is positioning itself to walk away victorious. And make sure you stick around until the end, because I'll also show you how to turn some of this chaos into profit, particularly in one vulnerable sector where China dominates 90% of global production: rare earth minerals. Let's dive in. One of the biggest delusions fueling this trade war is the Trump administration's overblown view of America's economic power, especially the influence of the American consumer. Listen to senior U.S. officials, and you'd think China is desperate, clinging to the U.S. market for survival. Trump's team keeps pushing the idea that America holds all the cards. This is what happens when a nation starts believing its own propaganda. Billionaire Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick said it plainly.
The table with Donald Trump or they don't. But let's be clear, we are their biggest client by far, by far, by far. The American consumer buys everything from China. They can't afford to be without us, and that's where we are.
But this mindset is stuck in the 1990s. Washington still pictures America as the undisputed center of the global economy, with everyone else lining up to sell to U.S. consumers. That worldview is dangerously outdated. Today, the real growth engines aren't in the U.S. anymore. China has risen as the top trading partner for most countries worldwide, a dramatic shift from the U.S.-dominated map of a few decades ago. While American politicians cling to nostalgia about a golden age that's long gone, China has been building a real future. From Latin America to Africa to Southeast Asia, Beijing has invested, traded, and secured partnerships, strengthening ties across emerging markets. Meanwhile, Americans are drowning in inflation, struggling with skyrocketing rents and grocery prices. Over 60% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. This is not a consumer base that China needs to survive. When U.S. officials insist China desperately needs the U.S. market, they show just how detached from reality they've become. Not only are they exaggerating America's influence, they're grossly underestimating China's internal strength. Forget the outdated image of China as a giant sweatshop pumping out cheap goods. That version of China has faded. Today, the domestic Chinese market is powerful and growing. Look at the numbers. Exports now account for just 19.7% of China's GDP, a massive decline from the 36% peak back in 2006. In contrast, the global average for export contribution to GDP is over 45%. This means China is far less dependent on exports than most countries. Roughly 80% of China's economic activity now comes from domestic consumption. China has become its own best customer. And here's something Washington keeps missing. The United States hasn't been China's biggest export destination for nearly a decade. Since 2016, China's top trading partner has been the broader Asian bloc. Meanwhile, exports to the U.S. have dropped from 19% in 2018 to under 15% today. Beijing planned for this shift. Washington didn't. And now, even America's closest allies are starting to push back against Trump's heavy-handed tactics. Just listen to this Japanese government representative, who didn't mince words when he described dealing with the U.S. Negotiating with them is like dealing with a delinquent kid extorting someone.
The US is saying is already an impossible task, the theory is already a mess, and there is no consistency whatsoever. However, if Japan were to negotiate about what they have been saying, well, to put it bluntly, it would be akin to a delinquent kid extorting someone.
That's right, a Japanese official publicly compared Trump's tactics to mafia-style bullying. And it's not just rhetoric. Japan and South Korea have signed new trilateral trade deals with China, overcoming historic tensions directly as a response to U.S. tariffs. Vietnam, another country with long-standing rivalries with China, welcomed President Xi Jinping and signed a record 45 new trade agreements. In real time, we are witnessing a dramatic shift. The United States is being isolated, while Beijing is building new bridges. And China is no longer pretending to be passive. Government officials have dropped the polite diplomacy and are now openly calling out the U.S. for weaponizing tariffs and trying to coerce the global economy. Victor Gao, vice president at the Center for China and Globalization, put it bluntly.
China is fully prepared to fight to the very end because the world is big enough that the United States is not the totality of the market in the world. So if the United States wants to go in that direction of completely shutting itself out of the China market, be my guest.
Yeah, and China will lose the US market, which, as I've said, is 15%.
We don't care. We don't care. China has been here for 5,000 years. Most of the time, there was no United States, and we survived. Right. And if the United States wants to bully China, we will deal with the situation without the United States. And we expect to survive for another 5,000 years.
That's the raw, unfiltered sentiment coming out of Beijing today. You know things are reaching a boiling point when the Chinese embassy in Washington, D.C. is posting clips of Ronald Reagan, yes, Ronald Reagan, warning Americans that tariffs and protectionism always backfire. As Reagan famously said,
over the past 200 years, not only has the argument against tariffs and trade barriers won nearly universal agreement among economists, but it has also proven itself in the real world, where we have seen free trading nations prosper while protectionist countries fall behind. America's most recent experiment with protectionism was a disaster for the working men and women of this country. When Congress passed the Smoot-Hawley tariff in 1930, we were told that it would protect America from foreign competition and save jobs in this country. The same line we hear today. The actual result was the Great Depression, the worst economic catastrophe in our history. 1 out of 4 Americans were thrown out of work. Yet today, protectionism is being used by some American politicians as a cheap form of nationalism. We should beware of the demagogues who are ready to declare a trade war against our friends, weakening our economy, our national security, and the entire free world.
The more Trump pushes tariffs, the more history and common sense proves how disastrous this path really is. Faced with mounting pressure, Trump has started to cave. He's granted sweeping exemptions for Chinese tech products, like iPhones and computers, after top CEOs, including Tim Cook, reportedly beg him to pull back. Apple made it clear, if forced to move production stateside, iPhones would cost thousands more per unit, something the fragile U.S. economy simply can't afford. Meanwhile, China has responded by tightening the screws even further. They've slapped export bans on heavy rare earth minerals, absolutely critical for U.S. defense manufacturing. And that's where the real danger lies, and the real opportunity. Because behind every fighter jet, every missile, every AI system, there's a hidden supply chain built on rare earth minerals like antimony. And China controls nearly all of it. One metal you've probably never heard of, antimony, could end up determining the outcome of future conflicts. Without antimony, the modern defense industry grinds to a halt. There would be no armor-piercing bullets, no missile guidance systems, no flame-resistant military gear, and even crucial technologies like semiconductors and nuclear components would be at risk. It's that critical. And here's the problem. The United States produces virtually none of it. Instead, China and Russia dominate the global supply chain. Recently, China tightened its grip even further, banning antimony exports, sending prices surging past $60,000 per ton. This isn't just market turbulence. It's a serious national security threat. The Pentagon knows it, NATO knows it, and smart investors are starting to realize it too. That's where a company like Military Metals Corp comes into play, ticker MI in Canada and MIF in the United States. Military Metals is one of the few publicly traded companies laser-focused on securing a Western-controlled supply of antimony. Their flagship project sits in Slovakia, right in the center of Europe, a strategically safe and stable region. And this isn't just some speculative exploration. The Slovakian site already holds over 60,000 tons of high-grade antimony, or, based on original Soviet-era geological surveys, now being upgraded to modern standards. At today's prices, that, or could be worth more than $3 billion. But here's where it gets even more interesting. The U.S. government has already demonstrated its willingness to invest heavily in securing antimony supplies. In 2022, the Defense Production Act granted $1.83 billion to Perpetua Resources, another antimony developer based in Idaho. Today, Perpetua has a market cap north of $1 billion, largely because of the strategic value of its antimony project. The connection is clear. When a company can help the West break free from China's stranglehold on critical minerals, the market rewards them big time. And right now, Military Metals is positioning itself to walk the same path. Still flying under the radar, it represents a rare early-stage opportunity in a sector about to explode with demand. Military Metals isn't just banking on one project either. In Canada, their Westcore mine, a former producer, still has stockpiled or from previous operations ready for reprocessing. This isn't about starting from scratch. It's about reviving overlooked strategic assets at the perfect time, when global supply chains are desperately searching for secure alternatives. With NATO defense budgets projected to soar to $1.5 trillion and U.S. policymakers aggressively pushing to rebuild domestic and allied supply lines, companies like Military Metals could be perfectly positioned to benefit. For investors who focus on defense, national security, or strategic metals, this is one of the very few pure-play antimony opportunities available to the public right now. But stepping back from specific companies for a second, let's not lose sight of the bigger picture. The trade war between the U.S. and China isn't going away anytime soon. And the sector where America is most exposed is rare earth minerals, an area where China commands over 90% of global production. Western governments are waking up to a brutal reality. They need to reshore critical mineral supply chains, and fast. This isn't just about economics anymore. It's about survival, national defense, and maintaining geopolitical leverage. That's why projects like those Military Metals is developing matter so much. And that's why you should have them firmly on your radar if you're watching the intersection of geopolitics and market opportunities. Now, stepping back to the broader trade war itself, Donald Trump entered this fight believing he held all the power. But even some of America's legacy media can't hide what's really happening anymore. The Wall Street Journal recently admitted it bluntly. China called Trump's bluff and appears to have won this round. All of Trump's unpredictable moves, slapping tariffs on, taking them off, changing targets, have thrown global markets into turmoil. The instability makes it impossible for businesses to plan beyond a few months, crushing long-term investments. Manufacturers can't commit to new plants. Supply chains are being rerouted or abandoned altogether. The cold truth is this: China remains the world's manufacturing hub. Almost every industry, tech, automotive, defense, healthcare, runs through Chinese supply chains at some stage. And now, because of short-sighted tariff policies, that foundation has been shaken. Small family-run businesses and global giants alike are trapped between ballooning costs and total unpredictability. What started as a political stunt has now turned into a full-scale economic disaster, powered by ego, not strategy. Donald Trump promised to make America great again. Instead, he delivered: skyrocketing prices, fractured alliances, a shattered economic strategy, and a credibility crisis on the global stage. China, meanwhile, has stayed calm, strategic, and deliberate, quietly strengthening its influence, signing new partnerships, and securing its role as the backbone of the future global economy. What we're witnessing isn't just another policy blunder. It's a historic unraveling of America's soft power. The country that once set global standards is now seen as erratic, unpredictable, and unreliable. The trade war, which was supposed to punish China, is instead accelerating the decline of the U.S. dollar's dominance, hastening the erosion of American economic influence, and pushing the rest of the world toward a new center of gravity in the Far East. And the most painful part? It didn't have to happen. America wasn't outgunned. It wasn't outmanned. It was simply outplayed by a rival that was patient, strategic, and unwilling to blink. While Trump waits for a phone call from Xi Jinping that might never come, the rest of the world is moving on without him. Everyone, thank you so much for making it to the end of today's episode. Remember, geopolitics moves markets. And if you've been watching the stock market lately, you already know just how volatile things have gotten. Personally, I'm very bullish on gold and rare earth minerals because no matter what happens with trade wars, elections, or economic policies, these resources remain at the core of global trade, technology, and defense. As always, do your own research before making any investment decisions. Thank you again for your incredible support, and I can't wait to see you all in our next video.